Hey everyone, we know how hard it can be to keep up with the latest news in Israel, so if you haven't had the time to stay on top of what's what in the Holy Land with ILTV, have no worries. It's time for our new show this week in Israel, where we'll give you the scoop on everything you need to know about the last 7 days right from Tel Aviv. I'm Natasha Kirchuk, here to keep you informed. I'm Natasha Kirchuk, and thanks for joining us from our studios in Israel. Coming up in today's newscast, new rocket attacks from Gaza take aim on an Israeli celebration near the border. Iran accuses Israel of fanning deadly protests. And Sayonara 2017, we're counting down the top headlines that rocked Israel this year. Stay tuned for the latest news in the Holy Land. That's it, my friends. 2017 has come to an end. So what were the highlights here in Israel? I'm about to break down the top 5 stories you need to know if you want to sound knowledgeable about the Holy Land. Coming in at number 1, the big old Trump Jerusalem announcement. U.S. President Donald Trump took the world's breath away on December 6th when he decided to officially recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital. And let's not forget, move the American embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Now, this isn't such big news for Israel. After all, the state has always considered Jerusalem its capital. But the speech caused major unrest across the Palestinian world, since many believe it undermines chances for a two-state solution in which a future Palestinian state would share Jerusalem as its capital. Number 2 deserves 2 words, Gal Gadot. If you haven't heard her name, you've been living under a rock, because this Israeli star has not only launched to international fame, she also happens to literally be Wonder Woman. And when I say Wonder Woman, did I mention that she's also the highest grossing actress of 2017? Little Miss Rishon LeZion started out as Miss Israel 2004, and then in superhero form used her IDF combat skills to land the role as Wonder Woman. And she broke a lot more than bad guys. She also broke records, helping the film become the highest grossing superhero film of all time at over $821 million. Now, number 3 is a little more divisive. Israeli soldier Elor Azaria became a household name in 2017 after he was convicted of manslaughter for killing a Palestinian terrorist in Hebron that had already been lying incapacitated on the ground. Azaria was caught on film as he shot a bullet into the Palestinian assailant's head, and the rest is history. His case caused a major divide throughout Israel, with many claiming he was a hero who had simply feared for his life, and others saying he was a murderer who had blatantly disregarded the Israeli army's moral code. Azaria is now serving 14 months in prison. Number 4, the Temple Mount conflict. This summer saw heightened tension in Jerusalem when 3 Arab Israelis shot 2 Israeli police officers guarding the Temple Mount complex. In response to the violence, Israel decided to install metal detectors at entrances to the holy site, which set off a barrage of protests from the Muslim world, claiming Israel was trying to impose control over the compound. Dozens of clashes and terror attacks later, Israel decided to remove the metal detectors a mere 11 days after the initial attack. Well, at number 5, buy a ticket and join the masses, because tourism in Israel reached an all-time high in 2017. A record 3.6 million people visited the Holy Land, a 25% jump from 2016. And boy, did it feel good over here. The tourism contributed about 20 billion shekels to the Israeli economy. The biggest group of visitors hailed from the United States, making up 21% of the tourism, with Russia and then France following shortly after. Well, that's it for 2017. And by the way, Happy New Year. Israel has accused Iran of both funding and organizing worldwide terror campaigns against the Jewish state. But it looks like that threat is even closer to home than many thought. The Shin Bet has just confirmed that an alleged Iranian terror cell was busted in the West Bank. 3 alleged members of the cell have been arrested and apparently were being directed by Iranian operatives in South Africa to orchestrate terror attacks in Israel. The Shin Bet claims the 3 suspects were ordered to set up a computer store in the West Bank, which served as a base for intelligence gathering. The suspects were then commanded to collect various intel on Israeli activities, including money, SIM cards, and photographs taken inside Israeli territory. Apparently, the main suspect, a 29-year-old Palestinian computer computer science student, was recruited into the spy ring by his cousin after he returned from South Africa. Israeli officials claim this cell has been operating for over 2 years in the West Bank. Prime Minister Netanyahu says this is clear evidence that Iran isn't content with merely funding terror groups like Hezbollah and Hamas, but is also clearly trying to organize terror attacks directly inside Israeli territory. Well, a controversial bill allowing the state to order convicted terrorists to death has just cleared its first hurdle. Proponents, including Prime Minister Netanyahu, say it's high time that terrorists should face the death penalty, but many argue it actually works against Israeli interests and may actually lead to even more terror attacks against Jews worldwide. ILTV's Aaron Porras is here with the details. Now, Aaron, what are the arguments behind why this death penalty would increase terror worldwide?
So the Shin Bet is afraid that this would agitate Israel's enemies, similarly to how recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital would agitate our enemies, and you see riots and protests and things like that all over the world right now. So that's what they're worried about primarily. But supporters of the bill are very confident that it would dissuade more terrorism than it would inspire.
Now, we can't ignore the fact that Jewish citizens have also been convicted in the past of similar acts of terror against Palestinians, even murder. Would this law go both ways? Would Israeli Jews also be subject to the death penalty?
One would assume so. I mean, everybody in Israel would be subject to an Israeli law. That being said, even if this were to pass through the final vote, it's unlikely that it would be used, as a blanket response to every act of terrorism perpetrated by a Palestinian, Arab, Israeli Jew, or otherwise. And I'll explain right now why in my report.
אני חושב שבמצבי קיצון יש גם היגיון פשוט. וההיגיון הפשוט הוא שמי ששוחט וצוחק לא יבלה את יתרת חייו בין כותלי הכלא, אלא יוצא להורג.
If passed in future readings, the new legislation would allow a simple majority rule to give convicted terrorists the death penalty. Israeli courts already have the power to order the death penalty, but it requires the unanimous consent of 3 military judges. At this time, the death penalty has only been used once in Israeli history, against convicted Nazi war criminal Adolf Eichmann in 1962. But Israel's Shin Bet security agency is one of the leading voices slamming this new death penalty legislation, arguing that putting terrorists to death will only invigorate future terror attacks and even trigger kidnappings of Jews outside of Israel all over the world. Defense Minister Lieberman apparently furiously stormed out of the meeting when criticism against the death penalty was raised, but Prime Minister Netanyahu has put his full support behind the bill. Clearly, this is not only a large political issue, but a very personal one as well.
Another rocket has just been fired from Gaza into Israeli territory. The rocket has struck an empty field in southern Israel, and no injuries or damage have been reported. But the army has just launched a counterattack against Hamas military targets in the Strip. The back-and-forth exchange of rocket fire and then IDF retaliation has been consistent for several weeks now. The attacks ramped up immediately following President Trump's bombshell recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital, and clearly they aren't fizzling out. Netanyahu has come under fire for failing to stop the rocket launches, and some have even gone so far as to call the Prime Minister weak in his response. But many officials agree that pushing too hard against Hamas could spark a war that neither side wants and derail the ongoing Palestinian reconciliation efforts. Those negotiations are at a standstill currently, but Israel has a vested interest in seeing things play out without interference. Regardless, more rocket fire will only fuel tensions between Israel and Gaza and put more lives in harm's way. The Knesset has just passed another law that's already stirring controversy, and this time it concerns the city of Jerusalem. The new law now requires a 2/3 majority from the Knesset to approve giving away any part of Jerusalem in future peace deals with the Palestinians. That includes East Jerusalem, which Palestinians have long hoped to make their future capital. Until now, such a move would have required approval from 61 members of the 120-seat Knesset. Now, 80 votes will be needed. Ironically, this vote passed 64 votes against 51, definitely short of a 2/3 majority. Many see this as a prime example of the law's true suspected goal to ensure that no part of Jerusalem is ever on the negotiating table for future peace deals. Though many Israeli lawmakers clearly see an undivided Jerusalem as the only option, critics say this law destroys any hope for peace talks with the Palestinians. That's because it effectively ensures East Jerusalem can never be legally transferred to any foreign entity. With the chaos and violence still fresh in everyone's mind following President Trump's recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital, many are also questioning the timing of this law. The Palestinians have not yet made an official statement. Well, President Trump's plans for Middle East peace have hit a snag following Trump's bombshell decision to recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital. The Palestinians say they no longer see the United States as an impartial negotiator of peace, but now Trump has just dropped an ultimatum. He's threatening to cut all aid to the Palestinians unless they come back to the table. Right now, the United States sends $300 million a year in foreign aid to the Palestinians. PA President Mahmoud Abbas's government is critically dependent on that money. But despite this threat, the Palestinians say they refuse to be blackmailed by Trump's ultimatum. A senior Palestinian official has accused the president of sabotaging the peace process in the first place by removing Jerusalem from the negotiating table. Furious that Trump, quote, now dares to blame the Palestinians for the consequences of his own irresponsible actions. America's ambassador to the UN, Nikki Haley, has echoed Trump's position and remains firm that the UN resolution denouncing Trump's Jerusalem announcement was detrimental to the peace process.
I think the president has basically said that he doesn't want to give any additional funding or stop funding until the Palestinians are agreeing to come back to the negotiation table. And what we saw with the resolution was not helpful to the situation. We're trying to move for a peace process, but if that doesn't happen, the president's not going to continue to fund that situation.
Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu's Likud party has just approved a bombshell new resolution. Though it isn't legally binding, the vote calls on the government to officially annex Jewish communities in the West Bank as Israeli territory.
ואנחנו, כשנחיל את הזכות הזו ונחיל את הריבונות, לא נעשה זאת בזכות הכוח שלנו. אנחנו נעשה זאת, כפי שאתם אומרים בצדק, בכוח הזכות ההיסטורית, הזכות הדתית, הזכות המוסרית, הזכות התנ"כית, והגיע הזמן לממש את הזכות הזו.
This is a controversial decision because most countries see these territories as illegally seized from Palestinian landowners. On top of that, international law makes it illegal in most cases to annex land captured from another country in war. But Israel has often moved full steam ahead with its settlement project, even placing settlers in the West Bank under Israeli civilian law because of historical, biblical, and security reasons. Ironically, the Knesset just approved a cooperation with the European Union that seems to work against the settlements. The plan greenlights Israeli participation in a series of projects, one that funnels millions of euros from Europe towards Israeli projects. But the agreement specifically doesn't include any Israeli projects in the West Bank, which has led many to accuse the government of actually agreeing to participate in the boycott against its own settlements. Jewish leaders from West Bank settlements are outraged over the government's consent, which will fund Palestinian projects in the West Bank, but no Israeli projects in the same area. Only one Israeli minister filed an objection to the deal, which has now been fully approved. The Israeli government is clamping down on the country's community of African asylum seekers once and for all. The Knesset has officially notified them that they have 3 months to voluntarily be deported to an unspecified African country, or else they'll be thrown in jail. ILTV's Brett Allen Smith is here with details on this plan. And Brett, how exactly does this work? Will everyone be forced to leave at once, or will anyone be allowed to stay?
Well, the government has been pretty clear that no, at the end of the day, no asylum seekers from Africa, man, woman, or child, will be allowed to stay in Israel. That's really the government's endgame here. This ultimatum is only the first step in a much larger plan, and this new deadline means that as of March, all single African men living in the country will be forced to choose between either deportation or imprisonment in an Israeli jail, with similar deadlines for families and visa holders soon to follow after that.
Now, this obviously is a controversial topic, and I'm sure you'll get into both sides of it in your report, but could you break down those two options for us? What exactly is the reality of deportation?
Well, that's exactly what makes it such a controversial issue, because in almost no other developed country is forced deportation even legal, and usually there's a very good reason for that. Most of these asylum seekers are Christians, mostly coming from Eritrea and Sudan. So when you hear stories about African migrants being dropped off in Rwanda, as Israel has already done in the past, you get some really chilling accounts. You hear stories
from last week that we put in the
exactly,
show.
Sure. You hear stories of trafficking, of abuse, of people just going missing, which is why this is generally outlawed across the board. Obviously, there's a lot to dive into here, so why don't we go ahead and take a look at the report. Though most countries consider these asylum seekers refugees, Israel has taken a hard line in defining them as illegal infiltrators. Thousands first fled to Israel without visas nearly a decade ago and claimed to have escaped genocide, persecution, and indefinite service in a slave army seeking a better life in the Jewish state.
המשימה השנייה היא להוציא את אלה, המסתננים הבלתי חוקיים, שחדרו לישראל באופן בלתי חוקי לפני הקמת המכשול. כאן היה מדובר בכ-60,000 איש, אנחנו הוצאנו כ-20,000, ועכשיו המשימה היא להוציא את היתרה. השנה אנחנו הוצאנו כ-4,000, והמאמץ הגדול הוא להוציא באופן משמעותי את רוב אלה שנשארו שהם שוהים ומסתננים בלתי חוקיים בישראל.
Making good on this threat, the government has just made its final ultimatum. Asylum seekers must now agree to be deported to an unspecified African country, presumed to be Rwanda, or else be thrown in jail indefinitely. Single men are first in line to face the 3-month deadline.
If they reject me, it's better for me to wait in prison than to go to Rwanda, because I don't know what is in Rwanda waiting for me. Even though we, as asylum seekers, ask the government to tell us what is the deal in Rwanda. We don't know nothing about Rwanda. But what I know, a lot of people live in this country, they took their documents from them when they are arriving in the airport. So they are smuggling them to other countries. Nobody is staying in Rwanda. That's what I know.
The government maintains that deporting every last man, woman, and child will be ultimately necessary in securing Israel's borders, but human rights groups have widely condemned this controversial tactic and agree that forced deportations means likely danger, if not death, for Africans already fleeing persecution. The government has promised to pay $3,500 to those who willingly leave, but with the total cost of the undertaking estimated to exceed hundreds of millions of shekels, many argue that the money would be better spent simply integrating this community into the country.
There are 38,000 asylum seekers here. Israel has the capacity to accept them, to integrate them, and instead is paying a poorer country to take its small share of refugees, a country like Rwanda, which is already hosting hundreds of thousands of refugees.
Others say that a country built on the dreams of Jewish refugees should open their hearts to Africans escaping similar persecution. But clearly, the government is committed to expelling this community at any cost.
Anti-regime protests are ramping up in Iran. Thousands of Iranian citizens have taken to the streets to protest the country's crippling economic conditions. But Iran's leaders are warning dire consequences for those who continue to protest. At this time, at least 9 demonstrators have been killed by the government's Revolutionary Guards. These are the worst clashes in Iran in nearly a decade. Details from the ground have been foggy because Iran's president blocked internet access once the protests broke out. Social networking apps like Instagram and Telegram have been totally blocked in an effort to keep protesters from organizing. But as you can see, demonstrators actually seem more passionate than ever to protest. Both U.S. President Donald Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu are commending the protesters, saying it's high time the Iranian people take back their country from leaders who squander wealth for terror. Bizarrely, Iranian leadership has accused Israel of somehow sparking these riots in the first place. Netanyahu has just offered this response.
I heard today Iran's President Rouhani's claim that Israel is behind the protests in Iran. It's not only false, it's laughable. And unlike Rouhani, I will not insult the Iranian people. They deserve better. Brave Iranians are pouring into the streets. They seek freedom, they seek justice, they seek the basic liberties that have been denied to them for decades. Iran's cruel regime wastes tens of billions of dollars spreading hate. This money could have built schools and hospitals. No wonder mothers and fathers are marching in the streets.
Ads for the upcoming season of the hit series Fauda have been quickening some pulses here in Israel. And no, it's not because they're excited for new episodes. It's because the creative ad campaign features billboards written completely in Arabic, warning people that the chaos is about to begin, without any apparent mention of the TV series. The sparse white text on black written without Hebrew or English translation first started appearing around major cities a few weeks ago. Israelis were a little bit puzzled at first, but when they started translating the billboards, which read "Prepare yourselves" and "On its way to you," a mild hysteria ensued. The hit show Fauda is a thriller about Israeli undercover forces and the Palestinians they hunt. But without any obvious connection to the series, the ominous text led some to worry that these threats were actually real. This panic created the exact buzz advertisers were probably hoping for, and fans were both relieved and impressed when they finally understood these were actually covert ads for their favorite TV series. Not everyone was thrilled, though. Two mayors from Israeli cities are demanding the billboards be pulled down, and some are outraged that the stunt brings the network dollars at the expense of the public. Either way, in this case, even bad press is good press, and expectations continue to soar for the newest season of everyone's favorite Israeli series. We're still crossing our fingers that Israeli superstar Gal Gadot scores an Oscar nomination for her incredible performance as Wonder Woman this year. Gadot became an instant household name when the film opened to rave success this summer. The film broke box office records, but get this, now Forbes has just named Gal Gadot as the highest grossing actress of the year.
This news comes as no shock to us. Wonder Woman was not only loved by critics for reigniting the superhero formula, it's also shattered both the glass ceiling and box office records. Wonder Woman is currently the highest-grossing live-action film ever directed by a woman and one of the top-grossing films of the year. Gadot actually donned the Wonder Woman costume twice this year, reprising the role in Justice League. Compared to men, Gadot is actually the number 3 overall top-grossing actor this year, behind Vin Diesel and Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. Even though the Golden Globes snubbed Gadot a nomination, clearly they couldn't overlook Gadot's massive contribution to the box office. She is now set to present a Golden Globe Award at this year's ceremony, but maybe by this time next year she'll be on the receiving end.
If you like money, then it might be time to invest in Israeli startups. 2017 saw a 110% increase in Israeli high-tech exits, totaling a whopping $7.44 billion. The average exit in 2017 was a not too shabby $106 million. But don't worry if you're feeling left out of all the fun. Here are 2017's top 5 startups from Israel's Silicon Wadi to keep your eyes on. At number 1, did you know that 40% of a conversation's meaning is just taken from the tone of a person's voice? Well, the Israeli startup Beyond Verbal certainly knows that, and they've created a voice recognition software that can sense emotional content. Here's what's crazy, though. It's so accurate, the firm claims it can be used to detect medical conditions like Parkinson's, autism, and heart problems. At number 2, the founders of Mobileye kept busy this year with a new startup called Orcam that literally helps the blind see. They've developed a pair of glasses that can read text out loud and recognize faces and common objects, providing the blind with a computer-assisted vision that they've never been able to have. At a $600 million valuation, it looks like an IPO might be next for them again. At number 3, sorry to break it to you, but driving is basically the same as bouncing around in a ball of metal. Doesn't sound so safe, does it? Well, on that note, thank heavens for the Israeli startup Nextcar, which has developed a car dash cam that can detect potential dangers before you're done for. The camera hooks up with a smartphone app that analyzes video in real time, preventing collisions, automatically recording dangerous incidents nearby, and most importantly, sending real-time alerts to nearby cars. Driving has never been safer. At number 4, every year farmers worldwide lose up to 23% of their yield because of crop disease. That's $300 billion in the trash can. Well, it's about to be saved by the Israeli company Taranis, which uses an array of data to map farms and predict which crops are at risk. Using aerial imagery, sensors, weather stations, and a smartphone app, the startup is already having an impact from Russia to Argentina to the United States. And for the farmers that already have small margins, it's a big deal because even 2% yield increase can lead to a 20% higher profit. Well, at number 5, sick of your packages always arriving late? Say hello to the Israeli startup Flytrex Aviation, which delivers packages up to 7 pounds with drones. Yes, you heard me right, delivery drones. These cloud-controlled octocopters can travel as far as 23 kilometers at speeds of up to 70 kilometers an hour. You can rent one to send over a package starting at just 80 cents a mile. That's it for this week's Roundup. Tune in next Friday for our next episode of This Week in Israel. I'm Natasha Kirchuk, and thanks for joining us from Tel Aviv.